Hi, my name is Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad, and we're here on location at the Saskatoon Museum of Military Artifacts, where I volunteer and help run this place together with a good gang of people. Now what I'm going to do is show you some of my favourite artifacts that we have here and some of our displays. There are a few hidden gems. If you realise this, the artifacts actually begin in the 1850s. So we are going right the way through the Victorian, First World War, and we end up at the modern day. So let's go and have a look. So here we are in our First World War section, and there's a few of the artifacts, these hidden gems, I'd like to show you. This one here, it's actually mine. I've given it to the museum. This is a petrol can from the First World War period. Now the reason I'm interested in this is I had the privilege to meet up and then interview the last surviving members of the Battle of the Somme, and it was actually on the Somme that we did this. It was an amazing experience for me. I was over there with the British Legion. I was in my First World War uniform. We're going back quite a few years now, must be 20 years at least. And these guys had seen me having a pint, as you do, in Albert, I think it was. And I was coaxed to go onto the coach and speak to these old guys. Questions going backwards and forwards. What an opportunity. What a bunch of men. But the one question I asked them was about water being fetched to the trenches in petrol cans. And they laughed at me. They said, oh yes. One of them says, you could even tell the different brands of the petrol when you drank the tea. And the tea always had a slick of oil on the top. So I filled this with water and let it soak for ages and cleaned it all out and then filled it again. And you can still smell the petrol from 100 years ago. So you imagine you've been wounded. They've managed to get you into the trench, you're not bleeding to death. They managed to get you a lukewarm cup of tea, but actually it tastes of petrol. So that's one of the stories we tell in the museum. As you can imagine, a museum like this will have lots of cap badges. We've got a complete collection from the First World War, as well as medals that family members have brought into the museum. But very sadly, we also have a collection, almost a dozen, of these condolence plaques, nicknamed the Death Penny. These were issued to relatives of the fallen as a memorial to dad, son or brother and that kind of thing. Do you know, there were 1,355,000 of those were issued. That's 450 tons of bronze. So as you move along, you've got this sad reminder of the First World War, but then we have some personal effects. Shoe brushes, a collection of buttons and badges. And we got soldiers' paybooks. I was in the army early enough to remember a paybook. Here we have a group of postcards. One of them is actually a Christmas card, and they were sent in 1915. These were popular in the trenches to send home. I actually have one from a dear friend of mine, Beatrice Seymour, whose brother died of his wounds received at the Battle of Loos in 1915. This here is a bullet pencil that was part of the Princess Mary's 1914 Christmas tin. And remarkably, we have one complete with the pencil and one of the packets of cigarettes dated 1914. What we have here is an army issue housewife, or hussif in the old terms. This contained buttons, spare cloth and thread, needle and thread, because you're expected to darn your own socks and repair some of the minor tears. And I'm of the age that when I first joined the army, the British Army, I had a hussif, a housewife. So finally, what we have right in the middle of this case is a Bible that was found on June the 5th, 1916. Belonged to Sergeant Spooner, 43rd Canadian Battalion, the BEF in France. Now I've done some checking up, and unfortunately Sergeant C.R. Spooner was killed in action the following day on the 6th of June 1916. He has no known grave and is one of the many thousands commemorated on the Menning Gate. Now this is a display that we've just finished, and this is a memorial really to the snipers in the Canadian Army in the First World War. As a Brit, I didn't really know about this until I moved to Canada and started the research. All over Canada, you have different bands of First Nations. You also have what are called the Métis, and I've got the Métis snipers over there. But let me start this end. First of all, we've got a Ross rifle. Now, the Ross rifle is a very accurate rifle, but it's not really soldier-proof. But the snipers in the Canadian Army preferred this to the short magazine Lee Enfield, the 303. But eventually, they had to go over to the Lee Enfield. It was soldier-proof. We've got a pair of World War I binoculars here to show that the sniper would have had an observer working with him. I've got a guy here, I don't know if we can focus on him, John Shuak. I actually teach some of the children from his school by remote learning, and they all know about this young, proud Canadian soldier. He was killed in Cambrai, northern France. So if we move along, you've got Francis Pegamagabo. This is probably one of the most famous of the snipers of the Canadian Army in the First World War. He was of the Ojibwe people. He became a politician and an activist after the First World War for native rights. And there you can see we've got the short magazine Lee Enfield rifle. And then two Métis snipers. Private Rubin was known as one bullet, one kill. And his photograph shows you that he was a slight, small man, but an absolute killer. And then over to the right, Henry Louis Norwest. He was such a good sniper, apparently 115 fatal shots to his record, so much so that the Germans sent out a team to track him down and kill him, which unfortunately they did. 1918, would you believe? The same battle that my grandfather was killed in. It's amazing what you find in the museums. I picked up this letter that was in amongst a few other letters from the First World War, and I read it, and it's a heartbreaker, and I've actually entitled it A Father's Letter. I've suspended it so you can turn it round and read the back and front, but there's a transcript, and it says, "Sir, in answer to your very kind letter telling us that our son, Private A. Sutherland, was killed on the 15th of September with a cheque for £2. That's his back pay." And he said it was the first we'd heard of it, and we're very much upset. This is the second boy we have lost in this war, the other killed on the 25th of January 1915. And then he asked the commanding officer, "Would it be possible, sir, to send us the address of the stretcher bearer who took charge of him when he was struck? Because I would like to write to him and see if he said anything to him before he passed away." We've got a photograph of the poor lad there. 42nd Battalion, Royal Highlanders of Canada. He was Scottish. And this is kind of what we're about at the museum. Personal stories. Keep the memory of these stories, these people, alive. What we have here is a lovely little collection. It's a memorial, really. It all starts with the photograph of four brothers. Three of them extremely proud of their brother Andrew, who is seated and is an officer. He's a lieutenant. But unfortunately, Lieutenant Andrew McDougall was killed on the 3rd of June 1916 in Ypres area fighting for the Battle of Mount Sorrel. His body was never recovered. But what we had was four groups of medals, some cap badges and Christmas tins that were all in different locations. And Vaughan, our archivist, who I must say is brilliant at this, realised that we had a collection. So I took over all the little bits, mounted them, and we give the story. We got Private James McDougall, then Private Hugh McDougall, Sergeant David McDougall, and then of course Lieutenant Andrew McDougall. We even have the memorial scroll that came with the death penny for Andrew, but unfortunately we don't have the death penny. That's out there somewhere. Terribly sad, but here it is now, all together, all reunited and on display for all to see. a memorial not just to Lieutenant Andrew McDougall, but to his brothers as well. So we've come across now into our World War II section, which is still under development, but you can see just part of the collection of the uniforms we have. And then on the far wall, we have our Nazi or Second World War German memorabilia. Now, these artifacts were brought home by returning Canadian soldiers. Now, we put it on display to put it in context. This is equipment, badges and the like that were brought back as mementos of war by returning Canadian soldiers. We don't sensationalize this, it's there and put into context. In amongst all of these cabinets and artifacts, we have this fantastic collection of medals. These belong to David Greyeyes. Now, he was a grain farmer, 1940, of the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation, and he joins the Canadian Army as a private soldier. Now, I know he was the first status Indian, as it's written, to be commissioned in the Canadian Army. So this is quite a soldier we've got there. He's gone all the way through the ranks. He's been commissioned. Now, he fought North Africa, Sicily, Italy, through then to France, Belgium, Holland. He saw the whole lot in Europe, and it's reflected in his medal collection. After the war, he marries Flora Jean. She was the first female First Nation to serve in the Royal Canadian Air Force. So this is quite a piece of history, and it's going to be our centrepiece for our First Nation and Métis display for the Second World War. It's easy to focus on people who fought. It's quite incredible, but there are some simple things in this museum that you just turn over a book or you move a box and you find something that's been stored away, and an incredible piece is just over here. Let's go and have a look. So there I was working away in one of the back rooms of the museum, and I found a plastic box and I opened it, and in it was a wedding dress. And I'm thinking to myself, what on earth is a wedding dress doing in the Saskatoon Museum of Military Artifacts? I got the whole thing out and I'm about to parcel it up and send it off to another museum in Saskatoon who might be interested, when I was stopped. One of our older members, Dorothy, bless her, she said, "Oh, that's the Doukhobor wedding dress." And I said, "I'm sorry, what's a Doukhobor?" And she explains it was a religious group of people who came to Canada to settle for a new life. And she said it used to be on display with her husband, with his uniform. He was in the Canadian Navy. And so I did a little bit of investigation, found the uniform, then a piece of their cake with a wedding photograph. But the problem we had then was putting the wedding dress back onto a mannequin. So I found a fairly decent mannequin, and I don't know about any of you other men, but I have never really dressed a woman. Undressed, but never dressed. And Dorothy roared with laughter when she saw me trying to get this wedding dress onto the model, especially when it was the underwear. It was hilarious. However, here they are, Mr. and Mrs. Chop. It was Nick Chop and Helen Pear-Hudoff, married on August the 6th, 1945, the day that the USA dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. So we're in another section now of the museum. This is the Canadian Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy. And it amazed me that we got so much stuff when you consider we're in the middle of the prairies of Canada to have a Navy section. But I've learnt that there were lots of men from Saskatchewan who served in the Navy. And in fact, our barman upstairs in the Legion, he's an old matlow from the Canadian Navy. Now I'm going to walk you over to a favourite piece of mine because it's quite rare. This is, I suppose, my fave here. This used to sit on a shelf, hidden away, covered in dust. What it is a model, a handmade model of the German battleship, the Bismarck. It's totally out of scale. It's got extra things it shouldn't have because this has been made by memory from one of the crew that survived and ended up as a prisoner in Canada. The detail in it is incredible, and it's all made from bits of scrap wood. The whole thing is there, some extra guns and some extra weight. It's got lots of aeroplanes on it, but I love this because this is a real piece of Second World War naval history made by a German prisoner of war. So we've placed it side by side with a model of the Tirpitz, which was a sister ship of the Bismarck. The reason I've done this is to show the accurate detail of what these battleships were like, because the model maker of here has added so many different things to it. What I would like to do is get an actual model of the Bismarck, but that's something I'm working on. But just before we go, we've got this we've got this memorial here of 3 sailors who were unfortunately lost during the Second World War. And you've got Anthony Lescue. Look at him. He was only 20 years of age and he was killed on his first voyage. It's heartbreaking when you think none of these guys have got a grave. They all went down with their ships. Over 117,000 Canadian servicemen and women have laid down their lives. World War I, World War II, Korea, Bosnia, Afghanistan, and the United Nations Peacekeeping Force. Canada's a small country, and this is quite a memorial. Reminds people the price of war. So just over from the Navy section, we have the Royal Canadian Air Force. We focus mainly on the Canadian effort into Bomber Command, which was incredible. But here we have a pilot's flying log, and I first saw it and I opened it up. And here's a photograph of young Joe Patterson. Now, when I opened up the book, I saw his photograph. I saw a bit of a brief, but didn't read it all. Instead, I opened up the book, and it gives his entire flying life, all the way through the Tiger Moths, the dates, the times. And I became, I suppose, immersed in this. What qualifications he had, what he did right, what he did wrong. There's a piece in here telling him off. Here he is. He's crashed a Hurricane, and it was all his own fault. He was careless. He crashed it on landing. And I'm really kind of going, wow. Oh, hang on, he's on a Spitfire here. And then you see his training to actually fight all the way through in the Spitfire, hour after hour. Then he's posted away. Eventually, I came to this piece here, turned the page, and there was nothing there. And I couldn't understand. I thought, oh, he must have come home then. And then I read that he'd been scrambled on the 30th of December there in his Spitfire. Flying Officer Patterson killed on this flight. He was shot down over Cyprus. Joe's buried in the Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery in Nicosia in Cyprus. Now, I used to be stationed in Cyprus in the British Army, and I've actually been to that cemetery. Probably walked past Joe's grave, but of course in those days I didn't realise who he was. What I'd like is a photograph of his grave. So if there's anybody who lives in Cyprus or is serving in the UN in Cyprus, if you could pop along to the cemetery, take a photograph of it and send it to us, I will display it alongside his flying log. So we're in the far corner of the museum where we have the Royal Canadian Mounted Police display. We've got lots of stuff about the Mounties, particularly about their provost duties as military police. But hanging on the wall is quite a rare thing really for Canada. 1876, 3rd of April. It's a letter from the government to a commanding officer of the Northwest Mounted Police with regards to receiving a defaulters list. Naughty policemen have been reported. I love this. It's an old piece, doesn't mean a lot, except it was written the year that the Canadian government passed the legislation, the Indian Act, which gave them, the federal government, the exclusive rights over Indian affairs with regards to Indian bans, legislation and their reserves. So it's quite an important time of year for Canada, but it's also the year that the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Greasy Grass itself, was fought just over the border in the United States. And finally, what I have here is a poster showing you all of the fallen servicemen and women of the Canadian Armed Forces who are over in Afghanistan in that mission there. This is incredibly important to me because our museum doesn't just reflect First, Second World War and maybe the Korean War. It's all other conflicts that Canada's been involved in. And this poster here of the fallen from Afghanistan, it is important. And I've noticed people coming here and they've come up to me and they've said, thank you. Because at the end of the day, it's important that we don't forget. Well, I hope you enjoyed that tour of our little museum here in Saskatoon, the Saskatoon Museum of Military Artifacts. If you did, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support our channel further, why not have a look at our Patreon community? The link is in the description. But before I go, a quick shout out to some of our Patreon members, Paul Clark, Gabor Radoch and Elisa Johnson. Hey guys, thanks a million. Bye for now.